Hello and welcome to Who's the Bossk? It's a Star Wars podcast from laughingplace.com. My name is Mike Celestino. I am your host. I am the lead Southern California reporter and editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place. This is episode number 122 of Who's the Bossk, and we are going to be talking about the fourth episode of the live-action Disney Plus series, Star Wars Andor. And for that discussion, I have invited back on the show my friend of years and years. I won't say how many years because it's going to make us both feel pretty old. But Liz Shannon Miller, who is currently the senior entertainment editor at Consequence. Liz, hi, how are you? Thank you for coming back on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I actually, Mike, I found something while cleaning my apartment like maybe a week or two ago that I wanted to start off by sharing. So I was the guest on the second ever episode of Who's the Bossk. And the way I remember this is that I found the original agenda that you printed out when you came over to my apartment to record that episode.
Yeah. That was back when I had this plan when I started this podcast to do literally every episode I wanted to do in person. And I started this podcast in February of 2020. And we all know what happened the following month. So world events shaped the way that this podcast turned out. But you know what? We get to do it remotely and we get to have more people, more different, a bigger variety of people on because of that. I also want to say hi to our guest co-host again, who is the co-founder of laughingplace.com, and that is Rebekah Moseley. Rebekah, hello. Thank you again for helping out and coming back. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to talking about this episode of Andor as we finally I feel really kind of get into the meat of what we're gonna start having as far as the show goes.
Me too. I just rewatched it again. I'm super excited to talk about it. But first, we legally have to do something called the 5 Star Wars questions. This is Liz's third time on the show, and that means she has graduated to level 3 of the 5 Star Wars questions. And level 3 begins with number 1 of level 3 is, what is your favorite Star Wars book or comic book and why?
Well, here's where I reveal that I haven't dug as much into the written material surrounding the Star Wars universe as I could have. And I do have right now, I purchased it, I pre-ordered it on Amazon when it was announced, but I'm very much looking forward to reading The Princess and the Scoundrel when I have time. But in the meantime, I will say I read The Courtship of Princess Leia years and years ago. I think I was on a cruise ship and it was in like the cruise ship library. And I have been quasi obsessed with it ever since. It's such a weird book. There's so many odd elements to it, but I deeply enjoyed reading it at the time. And I recently revisited it and it was, bonkers fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had author Beth Revis, who wrote The Princess and the Scoundrel, on the show about a month ago, I think. She was very kind and forthcoming about the book, which I really enjoyed as well. So, let me know what you think of that when you do get around to reading that. And then number 2 of the 5 Star Wars questions, level 3, if you could own a life-size working replica of any Star Wars vehicle, which would you choose?
Oh, this is easy. When I was a very small kid, Return of the Jedi was my favorite Star Wars movie, and the land speeder sequence through the forest was my favorite scene of the entire movie. And so, yeah, land speeder. I want to go
speeder bikes. I'm not gonna
speeder bike. No, please. You're right. No, God, making a mistake on a Star Wars podcast is like my worst nightmare. I apologize. Okay, I didn't double check what the name was, but yes, what was it again?
A speeder bike.
Speeder bike,
which have been featured in Andor as well.
Yeah, I love the speeder bikes. Anything within that genre of just something like, I never want to ride a motorcycle in real life, but I definitely want one of those.
You definitely want to be riding one of these at high speeds through a heavily wooded forest, because it just seems very safe.
Very safe.
Yeah. Number 3, what is your favorite non-human sentient Star Wars alien species? So we're not talking about the creatures here. Those are not part of the conversation. No banthas or dewbacks or anything like that. These are like Mon Calamari, the Twi'leks, the people who are like humanoid but non-human. What do you think? What's your favorite of those?
Oh, definitely Mon Calamari, or the Mon Calamarians. I think like there's just something visually so striking about them, and they were always just like really cool, good guys who were on the right side of the fight, and fought valiantly.
Yeah, and they're fish people. How could you go wrong?
Yeah, fish. It's awesome.
They're like squid people, I guess I should say, with hands. All right. Yeah. Number 4. What is your favorite piece of Star Wars music and why?
Oh gosh. I was gonna go William Z, because I mean, you that's where your mind automatically goes. But oh goodness, I'm gonna mispronounce the hell out of his name. But the composer for The Mandalorian, I think, has done some really lovely work, and
yes.
I think
Ludwig Göransson.
Thank you. And I. It's really lovely work, and I especially enjoyed the Mandalorian main theme, just because I think it really satisfies the mission brief of make it sound like Star Wars, but also make it a Western.
Yeah, totally agreed. I think he's done some amazing work and kind of, like you said, brought something new to it, in addition to making it feel totally right at home in this media franchise, I guess. Number 5, the 5th and final of level 3 of the 5 Star Wars questions. If you could go back in time and be present for the filming of any Star Wars live action scene, which would you choose?
Okay, I'm going to say the scene. Okay, so there's this amazing essay written by Carrie Fisher. It was written in the spring of 1999. It was a feature for Newsweek. It was basically just kind of her reaction to everyone getting in line for Star Wars Episode 1, and also a reflection on her time on the Star Wars universe. Also, she talked a little bit about The Matrix, because that movie was also coming out just at that point. And she talks in that essay, this is material that she elaborated on in her memoir later. I believe it's called The Princess Diaries. But she basically wrote about how there was this one scene of Empire Strikes Back where she and Harrison Ford had both been partying all night the night before with like Eric Idle and the Rolling Stones. And they'd been drinking something called Tunisian drain cleaner, floor cleaner, maybe. I forget exactly what it was called. I should have looked that up. But it's an amazing story. And apparently, like, she talks about how, like, whatever they drank that night, it didn't give them a hangover. And the next morning, they were just still smiling. And I think she refers to it as the only scene in the Star Wars trilogy where both she and Harrison Ford are smiling at the same time. And I just think that it'd be really fun to hang out with them in between takes and hear about the night they just had, because it sounds like it was pretty legendary.
Probably similar to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'll try to find you a link to an archived version of that essay, because it's really a beautiful piece of writing, and it's very funny.
Yeah, I think I've seen that story before or heard it somewhere. I haven't read The Princess Diaries, but I would like to. And yeah, it seems like that would definitely have been a lot of fun to be around them at that point, kind of like hanging out at Saturday Night Live during the 70s or something. Like,
exactly.
Oh, these people are all like out of their mind on drugs or alcohol and having a lot of fun because of it. But
by the way, I just double checked. It's The Princess Diarist, I think, is the name
Princess Diarist. Right. Yes.
Yes.
I've seen her one woman show, or maybe a couple different ones. I have not read her books though. I really want to go back and do that. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, that's going to bring us to the end of the 5 Star Wars questions and to Star Wars headlines for this week. Pause there to insert Star Wars headlines later on. Liz, I gotta say again, you're clicking, you're got some kind of distortion again in your microphone. Is there anything you can tinker with?
I mean, I'm just using the regular mic. I can like. Let me try. I'll just try like unplugging. So let's see. What am I using now? Okay, so now I'm just using.
That sounds fine.
Okay, so yeah, I'm specifying. I'm using the MacBook Pro microphone and all that.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want?
That
Do you
sounds...
want? Yeah.
No.
If I sound good now, do you want to re-record anything?
No, I think it was listenable. It was
Yeah.
just starting. It was kind of like
It was
building
getting
as
it.
it was going on. Yeah.
It felt like sometimes when your audio cord's beginning to die and you're like fiddling with
Yeah.
it a little bit, so you just get a little bit of pop. But no,
Yeah.
this is steady right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Great.
you're good. And we're back with Liz Shannon Miller to talk about episode 4 of Star Wars Andor, which was released this past Wednesday on Disney Plus. And we're going to start out this discussion by asking Liz what she thought of the previous 3 episodes that were released all at once last week. Liz, so what were your expectations going into this show? And then what did you think of that kind of run of those, that story arc that opened the series?
Basically, my expectations going into the show were I tried to keep them pretty muted, like, because I really enjoy Star Wars. I really enjoy new stories set in this universe, and it's always a bummer to get let down. In terms of this episode, in terms of the first 3 episodes, I was very pleasantly surprised by so much of it. I was really struck by like the emphasis on, real people living their real lives. The fact that you have 2 characters who are just in a casual sexual relationship, it feels relatively mind-blowing to me, just because it's Star Wars acknowledging that people have bodily functions and occasionally need to use them, and that beyond just eating. Like that was really striking for me. My biggest issue with the show so far, and I've complained about it a fair amount in my review and elsewhere, is that I just wish they weren't so literal about the concept of a blank hour movie, which is a very tired cliche that TV critics have been hearing for years now. Because when a filmmaker comes to TV and he's like, I'm not really making a TV show, I'm not slumming it, I'm making a blank hour movie. The most notorious example of this was probably when David Benioff and Weiss from Game of Thrones called Game of Thrones a 73-hour movie. But there was definitely chatter like that around Andor, and unfortunately Andor is a really good example of why the blank hour movie is a terrible way to approach television, because the whole evolution of television has really come to showcase how great it is when individual episodes of a show work on a quasi standalone basis, but then kind of add up together. Basically what I'm saying is I think the way that the 3 episodes of Andor work together is barely cohesive as one episode of television, let alone 3. And just look at how each episode ends in the complete absence of cliffhanger or real story momentum going forward. Like you're invested, you're interested in the world. I'm very interested in the world. I love the take on it. I just wish that the people involved with the writing cared more about the real benefits of approaching a story like this from an episodic viewpoint.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. We've certainly talked about that last week, and I wrote about it in my own reviews. And I kind of had this theory that Tony Gilroy, and I think his brother was Dan Gilroy, is writing the series. But I had this theory that they actually designed this season as 4 individual like mini movies, and then those got broken up into like 12 individual episodes. Yeah.
And I know that there are contractual reasons why they don't just, give up on the idea of calling it 12 episodes, and they just start saying it, and they, call it, and they don't just call it, 4 mini movies. But that being said, at least pretend to try. Yeah. Like it's like the fact that only episode 3 of the 4 episodes we're talking about today had anything resembling what we would recognize as a proper ending of a television episode is frustrating.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And yeah, I think when we get into talking about this week's episode, that's really my big and only complaint is that there's a very abrupt ending at the end. And it's the thing that stands out. I saw I'm sure you got screeners too over the summer. But when I saw that screen, I was like, oh, okay, this is just the pattern that this show is it's going to be like, oh, every 3 episodes, we're going to get an ending and then we'll move on to the next little arc.
Which is absurd. Better study those manuals, Andor. That's the thrilling cliffhanger we end on this week. Those manuals. Oh God, will Andor read the manuals?
Just picture him reading throughout this entire week as we're waiting for the next episode.
He better read those manuals. It was threatened.
He's got to learn the Aldani phrase book before next week's episode for sure.
God help him if he doesn't.
So we know our thoughts on the ending of this week's episode. Aldani is the title, which is also the planet that Stellan Skarsgård's character drops off Cassian Andor on. And his name is Luthen Rail. Now I have that in my notes. I'll keep forgetting it. Okay, so let's talk about our thoughts overall about this episode. And we'll start with you, Liz. Besides the ending, what did you think of this week's Andor episode?
It's really interesting. And I think especially everything to do with Mon Mothma, it makes it Mon Mothma and the new and the young what is it? Intelligence officer? I guess that's
ISB, which is the Imperial Security Bureau.
Yes. But everything to do with that character, everything to do with Mon Mothma was genuinely fascinating. And it really speaks to one of the strengths of the series so far, which is that it's providing so many varied viewpoints on this very specific era in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, totally intrigued by all the new characters that we got to meet. We're going to go through them in a little bit. But before that, let's get Rebekah's thoughts on this episode. Now, you were kind of hesitant about the series as a whole last week. Has this changed your mind either for the better or for the worse?
Oh yeah, it's much more this to me was much more engaging than what had been previously presented. For one thing, I tend to fall into the fan of the buddy camp, the buddy film, the camaraderie, elements. That's part of what I enjoyed about the original for me, was this to get this group coming together with Luke and Leia and Han, 3 very different personas having to kind of thrown into a circumstance together and figuring out how to work with each other. And so having this crew that he is joining, and clearly he's going to have those who are skeptical of him, those who want to embrace him, those who are super excited he's there. And so for me, I was like, okay, good. I'm on board. I'm on board with this. Yay, let's go.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would say that I think, especially upon my rewatch I just did this morning, which was the 3rd time I've seen this episode, I found the B and C plots of this episode way more interesting than the A plot, which was basically like, okay, Cassian shows up on this planet Aldani and he gets assigned to this team and they're all like hesitant to embrace him. And then they eventually, so it's like this kind of little like mini roadblock. But I just thought the ISB stuff on Coruscant and the Luthen Rail and Mon Mothma stuff were just so much more interesting. I just feel like the Cassian stuff in this episode kind of felt like almost kind of like filler to me. Like, oh, we have to get him to this point, but there just has to be a little bit of conflict along the way. But let's go through some of the major credits on this. This was directed by Susanna White, who I believe is the director of Generation Kill, although IMDb was not sure about that. It had it divided into different people. I think they haven't gotten it together yet over there. Written by Dan. Yeah.
I was sorry not to interrupt,
no,
but
please,
I was going to say,
do.
I mean, she just directed half the season. Like, she didn't direct the full season. That's
okay.
It's
Gotcha.
a limited. It was a limited series, or it was at least just like a first season. So, like a lot of shows, it had multiple directors, much like this show.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Written by Dan Gilroy, who is the brother of Tony Gilroy. I don't know if that's nepotism or if he's genuinely the best choice, but I think it was very well written. So I guess I can't complain too much. But he did write the movie Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal, which I enjoyed as well. The director of photography was Frank Lamb, who's done The Crown, BBC series. Editor Hazel Bailey worked on Black Mirror, and the music I think for the entire series, is by Nicholas Britell, who I did not mention last week, who composed the score for the Academy Award-winning film Moonlight. So very strong creative team working on this episode. And very quickly, let's go through the plot. We already talked about the Cassian thing, but I don't know. I just was fascinated by the Luthen stuff when he gets back to Coruscant. So Liz, to your memory, how would you encapsulate what happens on Coruscant in this episode?
Well, Mon Mothma goes shopping for a birthday present for her husband.
Yes, that should be the synopsis, the plot synopsis on Disney Plus.
I mean, that would be like a Mad Men synopsis from back, like, because Mad Men was notorious for its very vague, very vague log lines, and Mon Mothma goes shopping for a birthday present would be 100% a log line from a Mad Men episode.
That's a birthday present that she immediately declares is going back to the shop, by the way.
Well, he was a bad boy, and he doesn't deserve his present now, does he?
Everyone hates Mon Mothma's husband so much. This is the immediate reaction I have seen on Twitter among the community, is people despising that character.
I kind of dig his vibe. I know he's a bad person. He's clearly a bad person. He's clearly meant to represent, the elements that, are interested in complicity and comfort over actual rebellion. But I mean, I appreciate the fact that his voice is in there, and I appreciate that, we're talking about the fact that there are people who, I mean, even under fascist rule, people find ways to be comfortable. People find ways to be happy. People still prioritize dinner parties with the enemy over the well-being of their marriage.
What is his line at the end of that scene? Must everything be so serious and sad? I thought that was really funny. I enjoyed that character, and I was saying to Tori, my wife, that I really liked how the gender roles were reversed there, because you could see, I feel like everything that came out of that character's mouth, you could see coming out of in a more stereotypical type of a series or a show about a politician and their spouse. You could see that coming out of the housewife, and that, this is just a kind of a turn, a spin on that relationship, which I found really enjoyable. Anyway, getting past the house husband, what else happens for Mon Mothma and Luthen Rael?
Well, we get to see Luthen Rael transform into a new persona, which is a brilliant little bit of acting by Stellan Skarsgård. It's amazing. It's such a great little moment, and it just played perfectly quietly as you watch him get into character first, visually, and then personality wise, just a total transformation. And then he's playing an antique shop owner. The character is playing an antique shop owner in this context, who uses it as a way to get like a quick couple of moments of quiet with Mon Mothma before her driver realizes, because no one can be trusted. These are scary, dangerous days.
So here's my question. Here's my query. Pre the political climate in this environment, which Luthen that we've met, do you think is the authentic? Which one is more of who he truly would have been?
It's a great question. I feel like it's probably a marriage between the two, because you don't just get into being like that kind of antique dealer like on a whim, So I'm guessing he was probably into that beforehand, right?
I don't know. Like I feel like it's so interesting. That's such an interesting question, because I certainly, like, the antique dealer is not his only persona. Right. And I feel like, though, he's definitely very centered in who he is when he's with Andor. He has a very clear personality, a very clear way of approaching Andor that is essentially him manipulating Andor to doing what he wants. Mm-hmm. But I would also not be shocked if he has a lot more personalities beyond that, just by nature of being what is clearly a master spy.
Yeah. A spy in a galaxy far, far away. I loved all those moments that you talked about, him getting dressed, putting on the costume, and then kind of that little bit of rehearsal that he does And I think a lot of people have caught. I've been browsing Twitter a lot today to see people's responses, and yesterday, and it seems like that moment really stuck out in a lot of people's mind, and certainly did for me as well, as this brilliant bit of show not tell, as somebody said on Twitter, of what this character is all about, and his little pseudonym that he go. Or we don't even know if Luthen Rail is his real name, I guess, but he does have this alternate personality to hide his rebel instincts, I guess. Let's talk about the ISB. Rebekah, what are your memories about what's going on over there at the Imperial Security Bureau with the character's name is Dedra Miro, played by Denise Gow.
It was appropriately sterile
Yeah.
for what their purpose is. I enjoyed the dynamics of the politics, the nature of it, where she Dedra, right, was the one who wanted to, follow through on this piece of. Okay, look, I'll just boil it down to what I came away with. What I came away with was if the Empire had listened to women, they would have scored. They would have done better. That was ultimately the takeaway.
You're saying that the galaxy would be under permanent Imperial rule if the women were in charge.
If they'd have listened to her instincts and the way she was piecing things together, yes, the rebellion would never have taken off.
If women had built the Death Star, there would have never been room for the Millennium Falcon to fly into the middle of the thing and blow up the power core or whatever. Yeah,
a woman would have noticed. Hey, maybe that guy's. Anyone check out this Galen guy? Is he doing something funky with the plans? Women have great intuition. Yeah.
He seemed so opposed to working on a Death Star for so long, and then suddenly he's going along with it. Everything must be fine. There's no way he's putting in a fatal flaw into the construction of that Death Star. Oh boy. So those are the kind of A, B, and C plot, but there's also like the D story, which is about the character we had a long conversation about last week, which is Cyril Karn, who's kind of the de facto villain of this series so far. And he is fired from his position as the corporate security officer and dismissed. And he goes back home to Coruscant, and we get another great scene, very memorable scene, where he kind of knocks or buzzes his mother's door at her apartment in the lower level, like kind of like halfway down the levels of Coruscant. And there's this great moment where she slaps him and then hugs him and then like shoos away the across the hall neighbor who's like spying on them. What did you think of this stuff, Liz?
I mean, this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when it comes to the very poor approach to episodic structure with this show.
Right. Yeah.
Like, we did not need that scene this week. Put that scene next week or whatever week we get actual content with the mother. Like there was no purpose in planting that there. Because clearly the next scene after that scene is they're sitting inside and they're having a conversation. And thanks to the press photos, we know that scene's coming. It's in, it's that I'm guessing it's probably next week, but who's to say? There's no reason to put that. It was a good scene. It was a nicely detailed look at life in Coruscant if you don't have a big flying car. But it was so like it was a very good scene on its own. Should have been moved to the next episode.
Okay, Rebekah. Now I have to ask you: I mean, we didn't spend a lot of time with him, obviously, this week, as Liz pointed out.
Did he even like have a line of dialogue or beyond like "Hello, mother"?
I think he says "mother." I think is one word when he arrives back home. But Rebekah,
again, save yourself some money. Don't put that in that episode.
Right. Rebekah, I have to ask: what has your feelings? Have your feelings approached on evolved on this character?
He's still enigmatic for me. Yeah. I still feel like once again, he didn't have much dialogue. A lot of it is I'm interpreting body language, I'm interpreting things like this. And so I am still very much undecided as to who this character for me is. Is he somebody who is aligned with kind of that big vision of the Imperial forces, or is he somebody who's protocol oriented and isn't necessarily aware of the evil he's serving, for lack of a better word? That's still where I'm at. I'm kind of unsure how to read him totally as a character and where he's going to go. Is he going? There's part of me that wonders if he's going to be put at a crossroads of kind of that, just following orders concept. So, like, I'm still waiting.
Yeah, I saw somebody describe him on Twitter as lawful neutral, which I think, if you're dividing into what is it? Is that that's like a D&D thing, right, Liz? Like if people are dividing into
you can either be lawful neutral. You can it's good, neutral, and evil.
Chaotic.
It's lawful, chaotic, and then a neutral, and then good, evil, and neutral. So I think I may be mixing that up, but yeah. So the idea of approaching that character like that actually is really interesting because he's such a clear type of that kind of like the schmarmy, ambitious, paper pusher,
right?
Or not even paper pusher. Like he's just kind of like he's the. He kind of reminds me of Guy Pearce's character in LA Confidential from some perspective.
Yes. I picked up on that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, just a little smarmier. And but yeah, it is, I guess, important to remember that from his perspective, he is, following the law and doing exactly what his job entails.
Right. And I predicted last week that he is eventually going to enlist in the Empire. And I feel like him being on Coruscant near the Imperial Security Bureau headquarters is probably going to... I feel like these two characters, her name is Dedra, the ISB agent that we were following, and Cyril Karn are probably going to cross paths pretty soon. I also really liked the character named... Let me see if I can find it here among my list of new characters that were introduced. His name was Major Partagaz, and he's played by an actor named Anton Lesser, who we know from Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. And this guy is like pure bureaucracy in human form. He's like speaking rapid fire, and he just you could see his mind's like going a mile a minute, and it's ahead of his even his speaking, which my speaking is always behind my brain. So I just really enjoyed that character and really liked how he interacted with his underlings and how there's all this kind of infighting among the ISB agents and the superiors and stuff. I just am really curious to see how those relationships develop, and the fact that we get to see the inner workings of the ISB, which has been around in the expanded universe of Star Wars for so long, but we've never really seen it in live action. I just think that's really, really cool. And I like their uniforms too. Not that I would enlist in the Empire myself.
Sure.
Let's I want to talk about the Easter eggs in this episode because there's been a big conversation about Andor, and I've seen, in people's reviews and reactions online that there weren't enough Easter eggs, I guess, in the first 3 episodes, which is a strange complaint, but it is something that pops up in Star Wars content a lot, especially in these Disney Plus live action series. But I feel like this episode really turned that around, and we've seen, there's a great video that I sent both of you of Star Wars Explained, Alex Damon going through the antique shop and kind of pointing out all these crazy references to all sorts of things from other elements of Star Wars. What do you think about like fan service versus Easter eggs, Liz? Do you think there's a place for that in this kind of a more of a dramatic take on Star Wars?
I mean, absolutely. Like, because you said I did watch the video. You sent it to me this morning, and I managed to get it in, and it was really fun. But of course, like none of that really had any impact on me watching the first time. I wasn't paying attention for those details. I was just kind of really enmeshed in the story. I feel like I think it's really fun to include that stuff, and I don't see any reason not to do it. And I think like the one thing that is interesting to me is the fact that apparently there was stuff in that shop that is not technically canon anymore. And I think since the big, creation of the extended universe, like the concept of what is canon within Star Wars has gotten a little fuzzier in the years since. Like,
right.
it seems like it feels like every once in a while I'm hearing about something that's been brought out of non-canon status and back into the mainstream. So, I don't personally like you have a stick up my butt about it, like do what you feel.
Right.
But it is interesting when the franchises make choices like that, and kind of, I think, almost sometimes delight in screwing with people's heads.
Yeah, I love what you said about when you watch it the first time, you didn't even really notice that much stuff, because even in that video, Alex was saying how he kind of had a similar reaction. Like the first time through, he was paying more attention to the dialogue and the drama between those characters. And I love that it works both ways. If you're not a hardcore Star Wars fan and you're watching Andor, those things in the background aren't going to mean anything to you whatsoever, even if you zoomed in on them or freeze framed or whatever. But if you are a hardcore Star Wars fan, you can tell that somebody is paying attention, that they are making sure that this connects to everything else. And what I wanted to kind of observe about this is that Tony Gilroy, the showrunner for Andor, has come out and said previously a couple times, I've heard him say that he's not a particularly big Star Wars fan. So I don't think that he's the one doing this. From what I can glean from what I've seen online, and mostly from like Pablo Hidalgo tweeting about how proud he is of Andor, I believe that the Lucasfilm Story Group has had a big impact on a lot of this stuff, and is probably working very closely with the creative team behind the show to make sure that kind of stuff is in there. What about you, Rebekah? What did you think of that video? Is any of those Easter eggs stick out at you as being particularly? And now Liz pointed out the one from the Star Wars. Oh boy, there was a video game. Now I'm blanking on
it. Was it Knights, or was it no?
It was the Force Unleashed, which I've never played that video game. It was during my like dark period of not being terribly into Star Wars anymore. But I do want to go back and play that. But yeah, this is a reference to the Force Unleashed. I think it was a 2008 or something video game that they put in there. Did anything else jump out at you? I know Alex pointed out some things that were potentially from the Indiana Jones franchise, which was pretty cool.
Well, one of the things that kind of jumps out at me in support of your analysis of it is that the item that she ends up walking away with is not one of these recognizable artifacts so far. It isn't. Yeah. It doesn't seem to be something where instantly fans are like, oh, I know what that is. It's all those other surrounding components. And so for me, that says that Tony Gilroy was like, we're going to be going to this art, this antiquities dealer. What do you want to populate the room with? What should we populate the room with? And like you're saying, so the story group would have come in. Whereas for me, that relic perhaps is more indicative of the imagery that perhaps Gilroy and his team may have been more about. And that's kind of also, as far as Easter eggs go, those are some of the elements that for me captured me more. The fact that Luthen gave a Kyber crystal to Andor, and we know that Jyn Erso had that Kyber crystal from her mom, and she also had it when she fled. Those kinds of like little Easter eggs or callbacks, I enjoy those. But as far as this one, the one that caught my eye, like just naturally because I'm not as immersed, was the item that is similar to what is a ceremonial family relic from, is it Ryloth?
Yeah, Ryloth, the Twi'lek home planet.
That was that visual, because I could envision Hera holding something similar.
Right.
So I was like, oh, okay, I know what that thing is. That was the one that jumped out at me as far as like when I was watching. The other stuff, it was all looking at the videos or Twitter or elements like that. I'm not as immersed though. But the ones that I'm excited about, having heard about, is the World Between Worlds.
Right. Yeah, that's a big thing. Big, more mystical side of Star Wars coming from Star Wars Rebels. If you remember Ezra Bridger going into the World Between Worlds to kind of pull Ahsoka Tano back into the present, it kind of veers into this time travel territory, which I kind of don't want ever to be in Star Wars, but a little controversial, but I enjoyed that reference as well. And then also the mother, the father, and the brother, or whatever, from Star Wars Clone Wars, these three mystical Force characters represented there too. But yeah, I just love the set design, the production design that went into that.
Which one grabbed you,
location.
Mike? Which one jumped? I
Yeah.
mean, was there one in particular that got like woohoo, yay?
Oh,
I'm
it was
going with it.
yeah.
Perhaps it made you even say yippee.
I would say, well, ones that I didn't notice that Alex pointed out in his video, the Sankara stones, which he said, maybe, maybe not. And when I saw them, when he pointed them out, I was like, yeah, sure. I believe that those are the Sankara stones from Temple of Doom. But I always like he said, when Star Wars and Indiana Jones kind of reference each other, which has been going on since Raiders of the Lost Ark. So if that is the case, that is a pretty cool little Easter egg hidden in there. But it reminds me of going into Doc Ondar's Den of Antiquities in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and seeing all the amazing Easter eggs and references that are hidden around that shop, one of which was the Ark of the Covenant from Raiders of the Lost Ark, which has since been removed. But yeah, along the same lines, very exciting. And I hope we get to see more of that location and that persona coming from Luthen Rail. Let's go through the cast really quick because I just think everybody's doing such a great job. We've talked about Diego Luna and Stellan Skarsgård, Kyle Soller doing a wonderful job as Cyril Karn. I wanted to make a correction from last week because I got bad information from IMDb about Alex Fern's character, and I said some name that they had up there, which was also incorrect. His character's name is Sergeant Linus Mosk, and he appears briefly in this episode again when they're getting dismissed from that security force. And then Rupert Van Sittart is the other character in that scene who gets fired as Chief Hine is the name of that character. Then Genevieve O'Reilly. What do you think of her performance, Liz? She appeared previously in Rogue One as Mon Mothma, and she was in a deleted scene from Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which I think got cut, but you could see her in the background. What do you think of her? She hasn't really had much time on screen as this character before, but now that she's getting a lot of dialogue and a lot of screen time, what do you think of her as an actress?
I think she's great. It's funny. I haven't gone back and rewatched the original trilogy in a really long time. I'm looking forward to doing so after Andor season 1 wraps. I kind of want to trying to do a quasi chronological thing.
Sure.
So I haven't revisited the original performance of Mon Mothma. Is my point. Mothma. I always missay it.
Mon Mothma is a different.
Yes, exactly. But I am constantly doing that. But Mon Mothma. But I really enjoyed Genevieve O'Reilly here. I thought she brings a lot of nuance to it, a lot of quiet contemplation, which I find very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of like. I've watched the episode twice now, and both times I was really struck by the scene after she visits the antique shop of just being driven away by her new driver and sitting in the back seat. And the two reasons I'm fascinated by it are, one, she's just giving a really great performance. You can really see like kind of the weight of the situation on her shoulders. The other thing is that it feels shockingly like something that could be, it feels like a shocking burst of modernity. Like it feels like I'm watching someone in the back of a limo being driven away from an antique shop or something.
Yeah.
And it's always like every time a Star Wars vehicle or a Star Wars moment crosses into something that feels very familiar to right now, I find it simultaneously kind of cool and also a little disconcerting.
Sure, I can understand that. I remember seeing Patton Oswalt doing stand-up comedy after episode 2 of Attack of the Clones came out, and he had a whole bit about space canoes because there's a canoe in on Naboo when Anakin and Padme are hanging out there. But yeah, totally understand what you mean by that. So the rest of these actors I feel like they're either members of the team on the planet Aldhani or ISB agents. Let's go through these real quick. We had Denise Gow, who was Dedra Miro. Faye Marseille, she was also on Game of Thrones, I believe, and she played Vel Sartha, and she's kind of the leader of this little rebel cell on Aldhani. Verada Sethu was Cinta Kaz. Elizabeth Dulau was Clea Markey. Catherine Hunter was Edie Karn. Alistair Mackenzie. Now, this is Mon Mothma's husband. Perrin Firtha is his name. Anton Lesser was Major Partagaz. I talked about him earlier. Alex Lothar was Karis Nemec. Sul Remy is Lieutenant Gorn, Eben Moss Backrack is Arvel Skeen, and Gershwin Eustache Jr. was Taramin Barcona, and these are all supporting roles in this episode. Everybody did a really good job, I thought. Besides the ending, again, was there anything that you didn't care for in this episode that sticks out at you? Let's start with Liz.
Honestly, I love the fact we're gearing up for a heist. There are a few genres of entertainment I automatically lock in on, like a heist narrative. So that's gonna be a lot of fun to see unfold. I liked establishing the new camp and the new players. I did think it is the casting on the crew going out on this heist is really interesting to me, because you've got a couple of people I don't know, and then you've got Ebon Moss-Baccarat, who's like a pretty well-known actor across a number of exciting projects.
What else has he been in? I don't know him.
Oh, he's like he just showed up in, I think, I'm gonna look this up because he's like probably the thing that a lot of people recognize him from is Girls. He was a pretty
Girls.
Yeah, he played.
I've seen all of Girls. Who was he in Girls?
He was oh gosh, I'm gonna have to look this up now. But Ebon was also just recently in The Bear. He's a series regular on that show. He's one of the chefs.
Desi Harperin, is that the name from Girls? Desi?
Yes.
Or Desi?
Okay.
Wait, do I have that wrong? Am I thinking of the wrong guy? No, yeah, it's Desi Hart. Yeah, he's I think he's maybe like Gabby Hoffman's partner.
Okay.
But he also played a role. He was also in a season of The Punisher. He was just in The Dropout. He's the journalist working on the story, breaking the story of what's going on with Theranos. And yeah, I can't recommend The Bear highly enough. And he's really funny and sharp in it. So it's like it's kind of to me, watching that sequence. It was like a guy I vaguely know, a guy I vaguely know, a guy I vaguely know, and like, why is George Clooney here all of a sudden? Like, and this guy is not on the level of George Clooney, but it was a striking moment for you. It's just like one of these cast members is way more famous than the others.
How about you, Rebekah? Anything else stick out to you as that something that you particularly liked or didn't like?
Particularly liked Mon Mothma's house.
Right.
It's a good house.
The production design is just incredible on this show.
Stunning. What a nice place to come home to. That was impressive.
Do you feel like it'd be weird to have like the living room like right off the entranceway, like, or do you like the kind of like open floor plan situation?
I grew up with that, so it felt very familiar. Yeah. So you would walk in the front door, and immediately to your left was the dining room with the dining room table. So it was very, very familiar to the design of the home I spent years in.
Yeah, the production design, absolutely. The production design in this show is really blowing me away. I really like the ISB office, or that big like conference room as well. It's kind of like a geodesic dome type thing. It reminded me a little bit of the Cinerama Dome where I used to work. But yeah, you can really tell the difference between this show, which is being shot on practical sets, and the volume, where they shoot The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi and stuff. And that just feels like so much more restrained about what kind of locations they can have, and it just feels like they can do anything here.
And I found as she was walking up to the building on Coruscant, it felt like the old days when it was almost always the Bonaventure Hotel. It was like it was very nostalgic for me, because it had kind of that feel of the Bonaventure, and then they do the matte paintings around it for whether it was Buck Rogers or whoever was exploring the universe. It was like, so for that moment I was like, oh, kind of like the old school sci-fi. It's nice for me.
I love that aesthetic. We want this to look like the future, so we're shooting in a like downtown Los Angeles hotel lobby. It's so common, and it's so great.
Yeah.
Disney Hall has been used for the future a lot lately in several things that we've seen downtown LA. Liz, you were talking a little bit about all the actors popping up in the crew on Aldhani, this team that's going to perform this heist. And it reminded me of this moment where the younger kid, Who reminded me of a character from The Matrix. Remember that character from The
Oh
Matrix?
yeah,
Like the
the
young
mouse. I
kid.
think mouse.
Yeah, Mouse, exactly. The kid who designs all the people, the blonde lady and the you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's Alex Lothar. Who is an actor who's like, I immediately recognized him on, and secondary to that, I was like, oh, that other guy is somewhat familiar. So I did look him up, and he's been a pretty busy actor over the last few years. His probably biggest project is a Netflix show called The End of the Effing World. Censored for censoring the title for your podcast.
Sure.
But he's popped up in a lot of stuff. He was in The Last Duel. He's in The French Dispatch. He's I'm just scrolling through his IMDb. He was Christopher He was Christopher Robin, aged to 18, and Goodbye Christopher Robin. He's a lot. Yeah, I thought he was great. Like I'm genuinely excited for more of him. And he had a good. He seems like a fun element to bring into the mix.
Definitely. He has this one moment though that stuck out to me where he says he has this kind of like throwaway line where he says he I don't remember what the exact wording is, but he says he can sense or feel that Cassian Andor is dedicated to the cause. And I was like, are they hinting that this character might be Force sensitive? And that got me thinking like, okay, well, we're in this period between episodes 3 and 4, between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, where there's no Jedi, or most of the Jedi have been wiped out. Do we think that we're going to see any Force usage in this series, like direct, obvious, intentional Force usage? What do you think, Liz? Is that something that's going to happen, or are we going to keep this? Is Andor going to keep it pretty grounded as far as the magic of Star Wars goes?
Well, I'm gonna answer with my real answer, which is I do think I think they're probably not going to go that far with it. A lot of the press material kind of indicates that they're going to try to keep this really, really grounded, as opposed to like how The Mandalorian has gotten more Jedi-y over the years. But I will also add that my joke answer is, well, we know that we'll know for sure that the character is Force sensitive if in episode 5 they're in a really perilous situation and all of a sudden he's like, hey, wait, I have something really important I need to tell you.
If there's sinking into quicksand and he says, I really want to tell you something, and then we never find out what he had to say.
Yep. But that'll clearly be proof that he's Force sensitive.
What about you, Rebekah? What do you think?
I am not inclined to think we will see it as dramatically as a lights, like a lights, the Jedi to the rescue type scenario. But I do wonder. That comment, and then just the whole dynamic of what their plan is, where it involves like the timing of some celestial event and I don't know. For me, it feels like it kind of opens the door to a little bit more of that mystical realm. So I wouldn't be surprised to see you question, wait, was that just kind of innate good luck, or was there a little bit something more at play?
Yeah, Rebekah, you've heard me rant about this before, but the mystical side of the Star Wars mythos, I guess, is the least interesting part to me, but I like that it exists in the background. So this is like really tapping into what I love about Star Wars.
Mike filled out the survey.
Yeah,
what
the
Jedi
Jedi. I'm fine with the Jedi having existed at one point, but we don't need all these Jedi running around. Okay, anything else that either of you want to say about episode 4 of Star Wars Andor before we move along here? Pretty much covered everything.
I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's my last question then here before we do the final segment. What do you hope to see in future episodes? What are you expecting, and what are you hoping for, Liz, in Andor?
It's interesting because, we were talking earlier about the idea of these episodes being in kind of blocks. Each 3 episodes is his own little mini movie. And I'm intrigued to find out if the heist mini movie, if the heist is going to be limited to this current block of episodes, and at which point the third block of episodes would be dedicated to something else. And I think that's what I'm anticipating. And I'm also looking forward to that because as much as I am excited about a heist narrative, I also am really excited to see how accelerated this narrative can get. Like they're talking, they're shooting this as 2 seasons. They're not really talking about a 3rd season. So, and given that the character of Andor has a pretty clear destination he ends up in, I would expect that they're kind of just building the first 2 seasons as a self-contained story. And accordingly, I'm excited to see how much that accelerates, how much deeper they go into all of these different character stories. Like, the show's called Andor, but I'm finding it really interesting as an ensemble piece, and I really kind of hope that carries through.
I said to Tori yesterday, I think if Star Wars Rebels, the cartoon, the animated series hadn't existed already, this show could easily be called Rebellion. I feel like that would be almost a more appropriate title for it. What about you, Rebekah? After this week's episode, anything that you're hoping for or looking forward to or expecting to see?
I'm expecting us to see this particular planetary storyline wrap up in a more fast fashion than maybe otherwise, given the how many episodes we have, because I really do expect we will get back to Ferrix. And I think we will see. I'm expecting to see kind of how this new avenue for him to explore kind of plays out amongst the dynamics of his what is now his home planet. So that's kind of where I want to see more of that too, because I like more droid, by the way. We need more droid.
We need more B2 emo. And I do think we'll get back to Ferrix, kind of the way they returned to Lothal in Star Wars Rebels. I think that we will end up back there. Okay, that's going to conclude our discussion of this week's episode of Star Wars Andor. Let's go to our final segment here on Who's the Boss. It's called First Steps into a Larger World, where we talk about the media we've been consuming and or enjoying outside of Star Wars. My example this week is a documentary that I went to a screening for, and that was called Retrograde. It's not the type of movie that I ordinarily watch, but I did really think it was very well constructed and very enlightening, informative. It is about the end of the war in Afghanistan and the end of U.S. involvement there, and kind of what happened afterward, especially with the military forces who were fighting against the Taliban in Afghanistan. I'm not a big war person outside of Star Wars, so I don't ordinarily watch war movies or even war documentaries, but I did think this was very well made, and it's going to be coming out this fall from National Geographic. Liz, what have you been watching, reading, playing, anything like that lately, and what have you enjoyed or not enjoyed?
I will say, keeping things within the Disney family, the Hulu series Reboot has been really charming me. I've seen the full season, but it's rolling out right now on Hulu, and it's a deeply nerdy look at what it's like to make a TV show from the point of view centered around the making of basically a revival series, kicked off by a early 2000s sitcom. Rachel Bloom comes in. She wants to remake the original show, but more edgy with a twist. And the original cast gets back together because they aren't doing anything with their lives. And it's really fun. It's very sweet at points, and it like I said, I call it deeply nerdy because it is really, really focused on getting all the details of making television completely correct.
So have you seen the other two?
Yes.
You've probably seen the other two. This is probably like an inside Hollywood type show, kind of like that.
It's along those lines. The thing with Reboot is that it's actually a little less cynical than the other two. Okay. Definitely, both shows are very like aware family vibes and wanting to create like a good atmosphere. But in the case of Reboot, it's there's just a lot of real passion for television and for storytelling in the mix, as well as a pretty sweet family story as well. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
Which
Great, yeah.
Levitan has a great track record, kind of exploring, given Modern Family.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
bringing that in.
Yeah, Stephen Levitan, who created the show, like, you know, it's interesting because he definitely has a ton of multicam experience, but also very early in his career, he worked on the Larry Sanders Show. And it's that kind of vibe. I interviewed him as well as the cast for several series of features. And he was talking about how, like, working on Larry Sanders directly influenced how he wanted to make sure everything within this show felt very real and authentic.
Yeah, I saw the trailer for Reboot. Thought the trailer was very funny, and we definitely plan on checking that out whenever we have time. How about you, Rebekah? Anything you've enjoyed lately?
I've developed a love-hate relationship with this thing called Disney Dreamlight Valley. I got sucked into it, just thought, I'll give this a try for a little while. I never did Animal Crossing or any of those, but it's these games where you're continually given this to-do list in order to move forward in the game, and it's just this never-ending to-do list. So I enjoy it, but then I leave it and go back to Skywalker Saga Lego. That's much more tangible fun for me. This becomes almost like work.
Right. Yeah, that's what I did play Animal Crossing for a bit, and it did start to feel like going to work after a while. But this is on Nintendo Switch, the Dreamlight Valley.
It's on a lot of platforms, including computer, but I play on the Switch.
Okay. And yeah, that's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Who's the Boss. I really want to thank my guest co-host, Rebekah Moseley, and also my guest this week, of course, Liz Shannon Miller. Liz, you're over there at Consequence right now. So where can people go to find your writing? And is there anything that you've done lately over there at Consequence that you're particularly proud of that you want to point people toward?
Yeah, so consequence.net is the website for the website address, and you know, just kind of keeping up with everything. I guess I'll shout out again for my reboot coverage. It's spoiler free if you want to read it before then. And I basically wrote one very long feature about what the making of the show was like, and then in addition, I broke out my specific interview with Johnny Knoxville and Judy Greer, because it does end with my cat trying to maul my hand on video. And if you're gonna have a jackass moment, having it in front of Johnny Knoxville is pretty perfect.
Right, he certainly would empathize with you about that kind of an injury.
He was definitely laughing in the moment.
Well, great. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's fun. I actually, before I go, should I share with you the Star Wars headlines from episode 2?
Yes. What did we talk about?
We talked about there's a new Star Wars project from J.D. Dillard and Matt Owens.
Nope, not happening anymore.
Okay. I'm guessing this still happened. This Rise of Skywalker comic book adaptation.
No, actually, that did not happen. That also got canceled.
Okay. Luke gets a yellow lightsaber.
Yeah, that happened.
Okay.
We're Star 1 Wars, for 3 so far.
All right. Star Wars. This is again February 2020. Star Wars night sold out at Disneyland, but no Rise of the Resistance.
Oh, right.
We got a behind the scenes video of The Mandalorian and the virtual production, and then this bullet point works as follows: Toy Fair / Baby Yoda merch galore / Toy of the Year Awards / other reveals / are little children watching The Mandalorian ? I think we had a good discussion.
About that.
Yeah, we should go back and listen to episode 2 and find out what that actually meant. But yeah, it's great. It was great to be on the show then. It's great to be on the show now. I look forward to being back for level 4 of the questions. That'll be fun.
I got to come up with them first. But yeah, that was 2.5 years ago. If you want to go back and listen to Liz's first appearance on the show, and that's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Who's the Bossk. Next week we will be talking about Andor episode 5 with another guest. As always, please visit laughingplace.com for all your Disney news and opinions, and follow Who's the Bossk on Twitter at Who's the Bossk Pod is the handle over there on the Twitter app. My name is Mike Celestino. Thank you so much for listening again, and we'll see you real soon. Bye. All right. Thank you, Liz. We're gonna let you go, and we're gonna stay right here and do Star Wars headlines.
Yeah,
nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you, Rebekah. I hopefully see you around on the great wide internet. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for having you. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Liz. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Ta-da.
Okay. We interrupt this program to bring you some Star Wars headlines. This is just going to be me and Rebekah talking about what's happened in Star Wars news over the past week. So this is the big news that came out this past week that we kind of already knew, is that James Earl Jones has officially announced that he is retiring as the voice of Darth Vader. And so when Obi-Wan Kenobi, the series came out, we were all kind of wondering, how are they creating the voice of Darth Vader? Because they credit James Earl Jones at the end. And then you also see the re-speecher logo at the end of the credits in Star Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi on Disney Plus. And I think everybody just kind of figured, oh, they must be using the re-speecher to create his voice, but they want to credit him for giving permission. And I think this news just kind of confirms that, and I think that now officially the last time that James Earl Jones actually recorded new dialogue for Darth Vader was in The Rise of Skywalker, when he does a little bit of Darth Vader talking to Kylo Ren about how Emperor Palpatine was actually talking as Darth Vader. So it's not actually Darth Vader. Really, James Earl Jones's last performance as Darth Vader was as Emperor Palpatine, if that makes sense. And then there was another story that came out this week about the company that created Respeecher is actually based in Ukraine, which obviously has been going through a terrible year. And one of the technicians working on Respeecher was talking about how they were scrambling to get this show completed during the war and wanted to make sure they had it done. And then Lucasfilm also had a quote about how, if they weren't able to get it to them, they would have had backups, but it wouldn't have been nearly as good as what Respeecher did with Darth Vader. What are your thoughts on all this, Rebekah?
It's an amazing dynamic. The notion that James Earl Jones can retire, and yet that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to not hear his voice in projects, possibly, moving forward, and not in some sort of weird, way. I mean, it's impressive and a little scary how well they're able to, in essence, fill in kind of the gaps that they don't have, the way that this re-speecher is able to come in and bring his voice to life, even if he didn't necessarily read those words that way, kind of thing. It's amazing.
Yeah, we live in a crazy time for those. I remember when they were first doing these commercials back, I think it was in the 90s when I was a teenager, and they would take like an old Gene Kelly or Fred Astaire movie and like have him dancing around with a mop or something, or like a vacuum cleaner.
Yep.
And everybody was like, oh no, you can't do that. And now, I feel like things are 10 times crazier than that, with like Grand Moff Tarkin coming back in Rogue One. And it's only going to get more and more realistic as time goes by.
And those were rather recognizable. There was a certain level of like, I don't think it's uncanny valley, but in essence, you're like, I know that's not really him. That's something created. Whereas now it's much more. I mean, I've even had things where they take your picture. Remember, you used to do it at the theme park, right? You'd go and they'd like put you in a favorite moment to film. Like I have a picture of me ducking behind the counter with the Velociraptor coming around the corner from Jurassic Park. And it looks like, so, hey, look, we pasted her picture into this. But now you can, with your phone, just do it, and it's believable. Your friends would look at it and go, "Who? Wait, maybe they, they would have to pause." So it's amazing. It's a fascinating time. So.
Yeah, we do absolutely live in fascinating times for many, many reasons. So we are not recording this episode live via the Laughing Place YouTube channel this week because of the Hurricane Ian that's going on in Florida, in Central Florida right now. But in addition to that, Walt Disney World did shut down for a couple days maybe 3 days. I don't think we really know whether it's reopening tomorrow yet, right?
They,
Or the parks
they've said phased
phased
reopenings
reopening.
are anticipated.
Okay. And then also the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser, which is what makes this news relevant to our show, has shut down for how many total voyages got canceled? Do you know? Was it 1 or 2? I think I saw 2.
I just know that at the publishing of this, I think it was 2. It canceled upcoming voyages. So I haven't heard any further cruise cancellations or anything like that. But it said the cruises departing the 27th and the 29th were canceled due to the impact expected from Hurricane Ian.
And of course, I think I can speak for both of us that we say that our best wishes go out to all of our friends and coworkers and acquaintances, everybody, and listeners, of course, down there in Florida, and anyone who visits Laughing Place and anyone who doesn't visit Laughing Place. I hope that you got through the storm okay, and I hope the recovery effort goes well for everybody down there. Okay, we had we had a book review that I did this week for the High Republic, which is very exciting because phase 2 of the High Republic is about to start. This comes out next week. It's called Star Wars: The High Republic: Path of Deceit, and it was written by Justina Ireland and Tessa Gratton. And I thought it was really, really good. I actually really, really like this novel a lot. It's about a Force cult, which is right up my alley as well. Again, like, I'm not the biggest fan of the Jedi as central characters, but when you get into like other ways to interpret the Force, I find that very interesting. And that's what this book is all about. There are Jedi characters as well who go in to investigate this Force cult. And I don't really want to spoil too much of it because there's a lot of drama in it. There's a lot of, oh boy, if you read or consumed the High Republic phase 1 in any way and you found it to be distressing, there's going to be more of that coming up in the High Republic. So prepare yourself. Yeah, even right off the bat in this first book.
So just don't fall in love with these people, huh?
That would be, I don't want to say too much, but just be ready to be upset. I would say. And it's great. It's great because I love dark stuff. And it's wonderful for the drama of it all. Really, really good job writing this book, Justina Ireland and Tessa Gratton. Really enjoyed it. It's probably I would probably call it my favorite book in the High Republic so far. Not counting the comics. I really love the comics, the Kevin Scott comics from Marvel, and the Daniel Jose Older Trail of Shadows miniseries. Those are like A pluses in my book, and this is probably like an A or an A minus. So go ahead.
I was gonna say, without revealing like plot or whatnot, I know there were some new characters revealed in did any of them in particular, kind of reach out to you? Did you walk away, particularly enamored with any of them?
Yeah, I mean, I love cults. I love stories about cults, and I love cult leaders. So there's this cult leader called the Mother who shows up in this book and is a central figure. There's what she looks like right there. Very interesting. And we don't really know everything that's going on with this character just yet. But even at the end, well, I don't want to say, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but a very, very interesting character. I have to pause for one moment and let somebody in my front door, but I'm coming right back.
No worry. No worries.
If you could just vamp for a minute.
No problem. So, yeah. Okay, so I am also, like Mike, fascinated by the Force. And I think that's part of what has led me to not be as upset by The Last Jedi as some of my peers have been, because I like this notion that there's this absolute, like, universal truth of the Force and the balance of the light side and the dark side. And I like the idea that perhaps the Jedi were flawed in their interpretation of this universal truth of the Force. And so for me, that's kind of how I interpreted Luke's journey. And that's why is that he's kind of coming to that understanding, or maybe coming to that realization. I'm talking about the Last Jedi. For me, you're talking about the Force. And for me, I love the idea of the Force as like this universal truth. but then the Jedi kind of skew it. They kind of maybe mess up the explanation a little bit, and they kind of add their own little layers of, you know, what do's and don'ts that maybe aren't necessarily the reality of what that base universal truth is. And so the notion of this cult, you know, as well, is very, very intriguing. And I guess for me, that's part of what appealed to me in The Last Jedi, was this notion that maybe Luke was reevaluating the concept of the Force as a universal truth versus the Jedi perception or the Jedi filtering of that universal truth.
Yeah, and I would add to that and say, for you, Rebekah, or anyone out there listening, if you haven't consumed much of the High Republic yet, and you're looking to get into it, this book, Path of Deceit, might actually be the perfect place to start. Because now, actually, when this comes out, it will be technically the first novel or anything to take place in the current canon of all of Star Wars. So you could start here and just read through all of current Star Wars canon. And yeah, just like in the real world where there are many different religions and sects and stuff like that, the Force has inspired all these different interpretations, and they are getting into that in the High Republic, and I find it endlessly fascinating. So definitely recommend this book when it comes out next week. Comic book reviews, I had a couple that went up earlier this week. We got Han Solo and Chewbacca issue number 6. I'm enjoying this comic. It's not my favorite. I don't dislike it. It's just pretty good, I would say. And it involves Chewbacca right now is stuck in a prison. It's not an Imperial prison, even though this does take place when the Empire is still around, but it is run by a prison run by this Marshal Service. It's kind of like an independent entity from the Empire, but I believe they work for the Empire. It's pretty interesting. Maz Kanata is a character in this comic book, and we get to see also, you saw them on the cover, Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba from the Cantina in the original Star Wars movie show up. They both show up. And what I really liked about this issue is that it does shift focus to Chewbacca. And I've complained in earlier issues of this comic that it was mostly about Han, and Chewie didn't have a lot to do. So obviously the writers either had this in mind or responded to those reactions from whoever. But yeah, it's pretty fun. It's not something that you need to run out and grab. Maybe wait till the collected editions come out, I would say, for Han Solo and Chewbacca. And then we also got Dr. Aphra number 24. This I'm enjoying quite a bit. This also deals with the mysticism side of Star Wars, but kind of interpreted through the technological side of Star Wars. So that's an interesting marriage of those two ideas, because right now Dr. Aphra is possessed by this ancient artificial intelligence that mimics the dark side of the Force. So I was kind of reluctant to embrace this idea when it first started. We've talked about that in the past, but I like where it's going. And we got some flashbacks in this issue to another cult called the Ascendant. It's another Force cult. The Ascendant is not made up of Force sensitive individuals. They are people who just are kind of like obsessed with the Sith and want to emulate the Sith. But the Sith don't like that, because the Sith actually have Force powers. So they're in opposition to each other. And that is all very interesting. And I'm enjoying that plot line as well. And then lastly,
I was going to ask you about this rodent creature before you moved on. Was this creature introduced in this issue, or has this been a recurring character over the series? And have we seen rodent creatures like this before?
Okay, so that species is called a Chadrafan, and there is one of those creatures in the Cantina, again, in the original Star Wars film. It's a little bat monster that goes up to the bar and drinks one of the drinks. I think it might be blue milk or something in the bar there. But that's the species. This member of that species, I think her name is Miril, Miril, and she is the leader of the Ascendant, which is that cult that worships the dark side of the Force, but doesn't actually have access to Force powers. And she is appearing in Dr. Aphra's mind, because Aphra is kind of trapped within her own mind as she is possessed by this artificial intelligence. So she's traveling through her memories, and then she gets to visit the memories of that character Muriel and see how the Ascendant combated the Sith
Okay.
in history. A lot going on there. I always enjoyed Dr. Aphra. I like that side of the Star Wars galaxy, dealing with the history and the antiquities and everything, as you know. So yeah, we've talked about that today with Luthen Rail. You'll hear that after this, but we're recording this after that. But you know what I mean. I like Doc Ondar's Den of Antiquities. I like the antique part of Andor, and I like Dr. Aphra. So glad that they're delving into that kind of stuff more in Star Wars lore. Finally, in Star Wars headlines this week, they're doing the same thing that they did with The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. Did they do this with Obi-Wan? Yeah, I think they did, right? They put out these character posters.
Yeah.
So we got one for Stellan Skarsgård character Luthen Rail. And who else did we get? Mon Mothma. And one for Cassian Andor, of course.
And then we have some from previous week that I don't think we got to take a look at before.
Right. This is Cassian's adoptive mother, whose name is
Marva.
escaping me. Marva. There we go. And who else did we get? This is Cyril Karn. And Bix Kayleen, I think is her last name. So they'll be doing this, I'm assuming, every week after we get a new episode from Star Wars Andor. All right. I believe that is going to bring us to the end of Star Wars headlines.
Yep, we did it, Mike. We made it,
All right.
made it through.
So if you're watching this video, I think that's going to be kind of out of order. But when you listen to the audio, it's all going to make sense. How do we want to wrap up this broadcast?
You get to choose because you're going to use it as how you lead into your podcast. So I'll let you think on that for a moment. While I let people know that over at Nat Geo, hey, I'm going to sneak this in while Mike does that.
Okay.
They have a Explore the Architecture of Andor episode, apparently. So this is pretty cool. It's like from post-war Scotland to 1920s Amsterdam. It's over there on Disney Plus, and it's just an interesting kind of real world look at some of the locations that are featured in Andor. So I wanted to bring you that real quick while Mike sets himself up for how he's going to lead into his guest.
Yeah, I'll just say, thank you. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching. This is also going to be re-edited and rearranged into audio form over at the Who's the Bossk podcast. You can find Who's the Bossk at this Twitter account, Who's the Bossk pod. Otherwise, there's lots of other stuff happening here at laughingplace.com and on the YouTube channel. And from both Rebekah and I, thank you so much for watching. See you real soon. Bye.